Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really glad to be with you this afternoon. It's great for me to be able to be among incredible dairy cows and to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we do in USDA. So I'm Rosemary Sifford. I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Veterinary Services. And really what that means is I'm responsible for thinking about animal health for the whole herd of the United States. And I'll be honest, I grew up on a small farm in North Carolina. I had no idea what USDA did, much less what Veterinary Services did. And even when I went to veterinary school, I didn't know much about what USDA did or Veterinary Services did, and I wasn't very interested in knowing. But once I started to understand and work with the Department of Agriculture, it became very important to me because it's really important for protecting the health of the whole herd in the U.S. So I'm going to spend a little time today talking to you about protecting the herd for the United States from the producer level through the national and the international level. And then we'll talk a little bit about the specific disease that is on most of our minds these days, highly pathogenic avian influenza. So first off, why does animal health even matter? It matters on all the scales. So as I mentioned, at the producer level, there's a lot of things that a producer can do on the farm to protect animal health and maintain animal health. And certainly good management and maintaining animal health is important for a number of reasons. It's important for your bottom line. If you have healthy animals that are comfortable, they can certainly produce more and be in better situations to make more money for the farmer. In addition, it's really important for animal welfare and for your reputation as a producer, right? You want to be the producer that has the animals that are always in good shape. The same is true for us at the national level. It's really important for us that animals are on a whole are healthy and that we are able to preserve animal welfare and the economic value of those animals. And public health really comes into play for us because a lot of the diseases that we're worried about might have an impact on human health as well. And so we're very interested in making sure to control those diseases or eradicate them when possible so that we can protect human health as well. And then for us, the reputation at the national level really becomes a trade issue. We work to make sure that products from the United States, live animals and animal products, are deemed to be safe and wholesome by trading partners around the world so that they'll buy U.S. products. So that part of it is really important for us. That's our reputational piece on the national level, is making sure we can continue to engage in trade in the way that we would like to. So that's why animal health really matters. And how do we understand what's going on with animal health? Oops, sorry. So it comes down to disease monitoring. Again, this is true from the producer level up through the national level. At the producer level, you might not even start with tests for diseases, right? Producers are most likely going to recognize that something is not quite right long before they do any test or have any other activities going on. The producer is the person who sees the animal every day and knows when something just doesn't look the same way it did the day before, and that's when they're going to take action. That might mean they just take a closer look themselves. That might mean that they call a private practitioner, a veterinarian, and ask them to maybe take some samples or understand more clearly what's going on with that animal. But the producer at the local level will be doing the surveillance, whether that's just looking and understanding or getting actual test results or moving on. And then you'll take that information and determine what you want to do about the risk. You know, is this animal, is it something that's specific to her? She has a metabolic imbalance. She just isn't feeling well. You can treat her and not worry about everybody else. Or do you have an infectious disease and you need to take additional steps to protect the rest of the herd from what's going on? So that's your risk assessment and analysis. And then you make choices about what you want to do in response to that. Do you want to isolate that animal? Do you need to just treat her? Is no further action needed? So at the producer level, that's what disease monitoring looks like. It looks very similar for us on the state and national level. Except, of course, we're looking across all the herds. In some cases, we do have surveillance programs in place for diseases that we know are of concern for us. We have surveillance programs in place for tuberculosis and for brucellosis and for bovine spongiform encephalopathy and a number of other diseases. And so in those cases, we actually have active sample collection ongoing, and when we do find a sample that tests positive, we work with the affected producers to determine what we're going to do and what the response to that is going to be. For those kinds of diseases that we have a program, in most cases there's a set plan that's written out about what we're going to do and how we're going to respond to what testing we're going to do, if a quarantine is required or other movement restrictions, and then what's the response activity going to be. Of course, we also have to understand about emerging diseases, and as we talk a little later about high-path AI, that falls into the emerging disease category for us. And emerging diseases really just means you see something unusual, whether it's an unusual illness or unusual death, and we need to understand what's causing it, and we might not understand in the very beginning. We have to do some additional work to understand that, and then once we've done that additional work, again, we go back to what's the risk, and then what are we going to do about that risk? What's our response going to be? So all of that is really important, again, from the producer level all the way up through the national level. But then why is it important for us to actually have a national system? Why would we not just respond, let every producer do their own response? And we do depend on producers, even with the national response, to help us carry out the activities that we need to carry out. But what makes it really important is back to that reputational piece and the overall health of our herd and the ability for the United States to have a herd that is less at risk and gives the producer more of an opportunity to be able to increase the value of their herd without having to worry about those kinds of diseases. So, for instance, no producer in the United States has to worry about contagious bovine pleuropneumonia, because it was eradicated from the United States years ago. No producer in the United States has to worry on a regular basis about foot and mouth disease. We do prepare for foot and mouth disease because it still exists in a lot of other countries around the world, and we want to make sure that we're ready if we do have an incursion of foot and mouth disease. But the reason that U.S. producers don't have to spend money on treatments or vaccines or things to deal with those kinds of diseases is because of the national program that eradicated those diseases. We have very small pockets of brucellosis and tuberculosis left in the United States. We continue to work to control those diseases and would love to make it to eradication. And then we, like I said before, we monitor for other diseases and make sure that we address them appropriately. So all of this really, the basis for having an animal health program at the national level is to be able to protect the animal welfare and the producer livelihood and food security for the U.S. It gives producers an opportunity to be able to produce the crops and the animals that they'd like to produce without having to worry every day about all of the additional diseases that might be of importance or could impact them. And then let's talk a little bit about how that does relate to the international scheme. So why does it matter that we have an animal health program in the United States, and how does that get us to where we are with trade? So the animal health program in the United States allows us to go to other countries in the world and give them details about what we do and how we do it so that they can have a high level of confidence that any product they would get from the United States would be healthy and free of the diseases of concern for them. So that builds the credibility of our system. Our trading partners ask us very routinely for very detailed information about how we do surveillance, how we do response. They ask us how our epidemiologists look at the epidemiology and make determinations about what our response is going to be. And they are very interested in what controls we put in place and how we eradicate diseases. So we share that information, and that helps to build their confidence and allows them to allow us to trade even sometimes in the face of an outbreak. So an example of that is with highly pathogenic avian influenza on the poultry side. Historically, when we had outbreaks, trading partners might shut down the whole country for a time and not let us export any product. But over time, we've described to them how we put in place control zones and how we make sure that no product that's from within those control zones around an affected premises can be exported, and countries have understood and accepted that we're doing all the things that we've indicated that we'll do, and so they have allowed us to continue to export from areas that are not within those control zones. So that's the kind of work that we're able to do by having a really strong nationwide animal health program. We're able to continue to export, even sometimes in the face of an outbreak, if we can demonstrate that we've done a really good job and that outbreak is controlled. Animal health and that national level of animal health also allows us to increase the productivity, as I was mentioning before. Without having to worry about those diseases, producers can focus on other things to manage the health and welfare of the animals, to increase productivity, and that gives us more product to be able to sell on the national scale and international scale, and also increases the overall value of the production. So that is just overall more opportunities for our producers. The other side of the trade factor is that it's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service that's responsible for the imports coming into the United States. And we set requirements for imports that are based on the risk level. We require disease statements or testing based on certain products or animals entering the United States, and that helps us to make sure that we don't get any exotic diseases. So for instance, we do not accept live animals from foot and mouth disease affected countries because the risk is too high. We would have to go through extensive testing before we would accept an animal from a foot and mouth disease affected country. We do accept products from countries affected with foot and mouth disease if certain mitigations are put in place to make sure that those products aren't bringing the virus with them. So those are additional opportunities for our producers not to have to worry about managing those diseases, because we have protections in place at the borders and before the animals reach the border to help make sure that those diseases don't make it to the United States. So how do we engage on that international scale? One of the responsibilities of the team in APHIS is to make sure that trade is based on science and true animal health, and we work really hard with a number of international agencies to make sure that that we have a science basis, and that the science and the research that's conducted here in the United States is a part of what goes into that decision making. So the World Trade Organization is the organization that's responsible for the trade standards around the world, and they have the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Agreement that member countries sign on to. The United States is a member country signed on to that agreement. And as a part of that agreement, they recognize 3 groups as setting the standards for trade around the world. So for animal health, WOA, the World Organization for Animal Health, sets the standards. For food safety, Codex sets the standards. And for plant health, the International Plant Protection Committee sets the standards. So those organizations are responsible for saying, these are the things that are important in trade for this particular animal or this particular animal product, and these are what you should be looking at in establishing a trade agreement. So the United States plays a key role in helping WOA, the World Organization for Animal Health, in setting those standards. We provide research and information and subject matter expertise to the organization to help make sure that those scientists have the information available to them to help make scientifically based trade standards. So WOA is made up of all delegates, 1 delegate from each member country. I'm the delegate for the United States. Each member country is able to read those standards and vote on them after they've been through an extensive review process. So when a standard is brought forward, like if the United States wanted to bring forward a different surveillance standard for a particular disease, we would present it to the WOA Specialist Commission responsible for that. The Specialist Commission is made up of subject matter experts from around the world. They might look at that standard and draft some language that they would send out to all the member countries for their review. When the member countries get that standard for review, they can comment on it. Here in the United States, when we get those standards for review, we post them on our website, and we reach out to states and producer organizations. So for the dairy industry, the National Milk Producers Federation is one of the groups that we reach out to and say, hey, these standards are posted on our website. We'd really appreciate your comments. We get those comments in, and then we collate all the comments and submit to the World Organization for Animal Health and to the Specialist Commission for their analysis. The Specialist Commission will analyze the comments from around the world, and they'll make changes where they need to the standards. Once we've gone through about 2 rounds of that, they'll present a standard to the delegate body for voting. Generally, by the time we've reached that point, we're all in pretty unanimous agreement that it is science-based and sound. But if not, we can certainly vote against it and comment on the floor about what our concerns are. So through that process, we make sure that trade standards are science-based, and we have a high level of confidence in that. And then we use that science-based trade standard when we go into negotiations with trading partners about accepting product from the United States. So for instance, in the case of highly pathogenic avian influenza, we have very quickly done some research to demonstrate where the highest risk might be and where the risk is lowest. We know that pasteurization kills the virus in milk, and so there's no reason for there to be a challenge to our pasteurized milk products based on that disease. We have WOA support for that, and when we talk to our trading partners, we make sure that we share that information with them and that they understand, and that helps us to make sure that they don't put unnecessary barriers to those products in place. That ability to trade under those scientific standards is really, really important for all producers in the United States, because even if the product from a particular farm isn't going into trade, the fact that we have that market helps to raise the value of all the products in the United States. We also work very closely with other international organizations to help support that WOA structure, and we work with smaller groups to get the same consensus on international standards. So the United States is a member of the Quads Alliance, which consists of Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. And as a group, those countries get together and work on scientific standards and diseases and make sure to share that information with WOA, and having 5 countries, particularly 5 developed countries, to share that information is often very important. We also participate in the G7 and other organizations, in addition to just the work that we do with individual countries. So all of that is to say that animal health from the farm all the way through the national and the international level is important for a number of reasons, and there's a lot of value to having a national animal health program. It really supports producers on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to transition now to our current real-life example of highly pathogenic avian influenza. I'm going to talk a little bit about poultry, so everybody hold on for just a second. But highly pathogenic avian influenza, as the name implies, has been associated with poultry. The name for the virus is actually based on the pathogenicity that it creates in poultry. So highly pathogenic means it kills a lot of poultry. We can look at the virus and see from the structure of the virus that it's highly pathogenic, but the name came from back before that, when the only way we had to do it was actually infect birds and see how many it killed. And if it killed a bunch, it was highly pathogenic, and if it didn't kill a bunch, it was low pathogenicity. So this one is highly pathogenic, and we've had incursions of highly pathogenic avian influenza a number of different times over recent years. Most of those incursions have only lasted for 1 migratory season, because it's migratory wild birds that become infected with the virus. They bring it into the United States in their migration, and then it comes into contact with poultry in some way. Usually that is the migratory wild birds are attracted to the area around a poultry farm for whatever reason, water or feed or access to something of interest to them. And then through some means, whether it's tracking feces or dust being sucked in through the fans or some other means, it gets into the barns with the poultry and starts killing birds. In 2014-15, we had a pretty significant outbreak, and we started to respond to that. In that outbreak, normally with poultry, we respond by depopulating. because the virus kills a lot of birds anyway. It's better for animal welfare to avoid the birds having to die from the virus, and it keeps the possibility down for that virus from transmitting from one farm to another and affecting more poultry. So we depopulate poultry, and then we clean and disinfect the barns and eliminate the virus, and then the poultry farm can repopulate with poultry after that. And generally, after 1 or 2 seasons of migration in the past, the virus has not come back with the wild birds, and we've been able to have a little respite. However, in February 2022, the wild birds brought highly pathogenic avian influenza to the United States. It had already been circulating in Europe for about a year before we had our first cases here in the United States. And unfortunately for us, the wild birds have continued to carry the virus through each migratory season since then. And so as we come into fall of 2024, we are very concerned that it will continue to circulate within the migratory wild birds. The samples that we have from wild birds do indicate that there is still some circulating virus out there. So we are encouraging producers to practice really good biosecurity to avoid having that virus get into their farms. But we have been dealing with this particular outbreak in poultry since February 2022, have been working very diligently to make sure to eradicate it from the domestic birds, and have been successful in that. We have not really had very much transmission from one domestic flock to another. We have had continual introductions from the wild birds. So then you come to the spring of 2024, and we add to that the situation with dairy cattle. We knew early in 2024 that something was going on. Private practitioners and others and producers were seeing a clinical syndrome that was unusual, and that when the private practitioners were submitting samples for testing, none of the testing was really leading to a clear diagnosis. And so in late March, our unusual morbidity and mortality team got involved. That group of people looks at any unusual illness or death in livestock and tries to understand more about what's going on. And at about the same time, some of the private practitioners were saying, hey, we should probably be thinking about high-path AI and testing for high-path AI. And sure enough, we ended up finding that there was a positive case, and as we continued to work through that, we determined that that was the actual cause of the clinical syndrome that we were seeing. So we started to work right away to understand what we needed to do and how we needed to address this disease in dairy cattle. Obviously very different than poultry. It wasn't killing dairy cows. They were recovering with supportive care. So we needed to understand what the most important things were to do. Some of the early epidemiology definitely indicated that the virus was moving around with animal movements. And so in late April, we implemented a federal order to require testing of dairy cattle that move interstate, lactating dairy cattle moving interstate, because the evidence that we had at the time indicated that the movement of lactating dairy cattle was how we were primarily moving the virus around. And that was a set of testing that we could require. In addition, we added the requirement that all positive influenza A tests for livestock be reportable to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so we could try to understand more clearly what was going on out there. We've continued to work with states and producers and industry since that time. We do continue to see the virus in dairy herds. We've implemented a number of support for dairymen that I'll talk about more in just a second. But we do continue to do surveillance and to work with producers to implement biosecurity. The epidemiology indicates that the virus moves through our movements, through movement of animals, movement of equipment, or movement of people. And so it's definitely important for us to focus in on our biosecurity. So moving on a little bit about the regulatory impact associated with this. As I said, our goal and effort here is to manage the disease, to be able to build confidence in our products, and at the same time to be able to keep business continuity up for the producers. And so we've tried to understand as much as we can about how the disease is working, to understand what the epidemiology is, how it's moving around, and then use that information to help protect producers from the disease, and at the same time make sure that producers who do not have the disease can continue with their business operations with as little impact as possible. We've also worked very hard with our partners to look at the food safety and to demonstrate that pasteurization is an effective tool to mitigate the virus, and then to also work with our public health partners to understand the risk to humans in contact with these animals and be able to work with them to provide appropriate protective equipment for those people. And we've done a lot of work over the last several years with other diseases in dairy cattle. We weren't really thinking about high-path AI in dairy cattle for the last few years, but we were thinking about foot and mouth disease. And we have worked with producers and industry groups to put together a lot of biosecurity materials to help make sure that milk can be moved effectively in the event of a foot and mouth disease outbreak. And it just so happens that viruses have a lot in common, and so all of those biosecurity things that we have put together and have planned for foot and mouth disease can be very effective tools in this event as well. So really encouraging producers to look at that secure milk supply material and use that as a baseline for how to protect yourself against these kinds of viruses. Our action strategy is really made up of 4 key parts. Like I said, understanding the virus in the cattle, understanding how it's moving and what the effects are on the cattle, understanding how the virus is distributed amongst the cattle herd, and being able to address that by mitigating the movement of the virus, and then providing support to the producers to make sure that they can continue business continuity and continue to remain in business through this challenge. So to understand the virus in cattle, we primarily focus on the epidemiology. We have a lot of partners. I see Dr. Paulson in the back who are doing a lot of other research to help look at some of the transmission studies and pathogenicity that will help to build with the epi work that we're doing to help us have a more clear picture of what producers need to focus on in their efforts to keep this virus off their farms and then deal with it effectively if it does get onto their farms. Our movement controls are really focused on mitigating the movement of the virus. As I mentioned, right now, all the epidemiology and the work we've done points to the virus moving through movement of equipment and people and things. And so I think if we can be really diligent about making sure that we don't share and making sure that if we have a need to share something that it's cleaned and disinfected properly before it's shared, that can make a real impact on our ability to keep from moving this virus around. Even within a dairy farm that is affected, we can offer producers some help for how to set separation so that they can keep from moving the virus around within the farm and help for the virus to be cleared from the farm. As I mentioned, we have the federal order for pre-movement testing for animals that are in interstate commerce. Some states have put in place movement testing for herds within the state, and some states have also put in place general surveillance for herds in their state. All of that helps provide us more information about where the virus is and gives us the opportunity to be able to isolate it and then eliminate it from the herd, which is our ultimate goal. We'll talk a little bit here about some of the support to producers, and the Dairy Herd Status Program is one of the things that I want to spend just a minute on. The Dairy Herd Status Program is a surveillance program that allows a producer to be able to understand what the status of their herd is. And then one of the benefits is that if you are unaffected under this program through your testing, you do not have to do any additional testing for pre-movement. So for instance, if you are in the herd status program and you're considered unaffected, you've moved in through the 3 consecutive weeks of negative tests and have moved into the monitored unaffected status. If you want to move cattle across state lines, you don't have to do any additional testing to be able to do that. Your status in the program will be sufficient. Being in the program also gives you the opportunity to work with us directly on the biosecurity and the testing to stay at that status. And if you move into the status program and become affected, we'll continue to work with you and help you work through the epi investigation and understand how you might have gotten the virus and what you can do to minimize the risk, and then to help the virus, to keep from having it continue in your herd, to get rid of it in the herd and get back to unaffected status. We do have a number of financial incentives available to help producers through all of this, from covering the testing to covering some of the veterinary costs for having a veterinarian, to having somebody come out and help you with a biosecurity plan or audit your biosecurity plan if you have one in place, personal protective equipment for employees, and a number of other items. And there is a handout at the back that covers a lot of that material and how you can get involved in the status program. We really encourage producers to be involved in the status program because this is an important way for us to understand where the virus is and what's going on, and it gives producers a level of confidence that they don't have the virus and that they've maintained the biosecurity necessary to keep from having to worry about the virus. I don't have a slide here, but we also have the ELAP program, which is through the Farm Service Agency and allows producers to have the ability to recoup money that they might have lost due to milk production loss. And there's more information about that in one of the handouts as well. But an affected producer is also able to get some financial support to recoup the lost funds from those animals that were affected. So I wanted to go back for just a second to the secure milk supply resources. As I mentioned, the secure milk supply was not designed with high-path AI in mind. It was designed with foot and mouth disease in mind. But the enhanced biosecurity that's available through that program is really valuable for a number of infectious diseases, and that includes high-path avian influenza. So this website has a lot of really good information for producers about biosecurity and how to improve biosecurity on the farm. And there's opportunities here to look at biosecurity between farms and coming onto the farm, as well as biosecurity within the farm, separating different groups of cattle and separating pieces of the operation to help make sure that you're not moving potential pathogens from one group to another. So I would really encourage folks to have a look at the secure milk supply resources and talk to your veterinarian or talk to our staff if you have any questions or would like some help and support to improve biosecurity. We do have staff members in every state, and many of the Wisconsin staff are here with us today. So folks who are really happy to help you get your operation in good order. And then here is the list of producer support. Again, this is also on the handouts in the back, but we really are trying to support producers through the testing for all the surveillance, as well as biosecurity implementation and making sure that you have the ability to put good biosecurity in place. And another key factor here that is not always a factor in other situations is that we know that the milk has quite a bit of virus in it, and so we want to make sure that producers have the opportunity to treat milk before it's disposed of, so that it isn't out in the lagoon affected with virus. So we also have producer support to help pay for some heat treatment for disposal of milk. So here mentions getting in touch with the area veterinarian in charge to enroll. Certainly any of our staff is happy to help in any way. Any questions that you have, we're happy to try to help folks. Our ultimate goal is to be able to eliminate the virus from the dairy herd. We think that's very possible. The spillover event does not seem to be very easily repeatable. All the herds that we've seen affected since that original spillover event have been affected through movements. And so if we can do a good job of limiting those movements as much as possible and then being as secure as we can be in the movements that need to happen, working on our biosecurity and finding out where the virus is through surveillance and then being able to eliminate it from the herds where we know that it is, we have a really good opportunity to eliminate this virus from the herd entirely. And that's really what we want to do, because the bottom line is avian influenza viruses are dangerous, obviously now not only to cattle but to poultry. We know they're dangerous to poultry, and we know that it can move from a dairy cattle herd back to a poultry flock. So we certainly do not want that to happen. And then influenza viruses as a whole tend to be viruses that can shift and change and might be dangerous to humans if they do shift and change. And so we certainly do not want to have a circulating influenza virus for that reason as well. So a lot of energy and effort going into the ability to just try to eliminate this virus from the herd, which is a good goal for us to have, and one that is very attainable. So with that, I will see if there are any questions. At this point, not necessary. A vaccine would not be necessary in order to eradicate it. We have demonstrated that herds are able to clear the virus through practices in herd and get the virus out. Timing-wise, that might take a month or a couple of months, but we definitely know that herds can clear the virus. So I don't think it's necessary, but we will continue the research to have the possibility of having the vaccines available, working with manufacturers in case there are other changes that we aren't aware of at this point. Yep, I'm not sure. I'm not connected to the internet on my computer right now. But if you go to the USDA APHIS website, if you type in USDA APHIS high path AI, it'll bring you to a page that has a poultry map and a livestock map and a wild bird map. So it's 3 separate maps, but then you can look at those different ones. The way the map is established, it will automatically show you the last 30 days. If you want to see a different time frame, there are buttons to be able to change that time frame. But it's USDA APHIS high path AI. If you put that in your search box, it'll take you right there. Well, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate your time today.